Right, welcome everyone. My name is Michael David Fox. I'm the director of the Center for Eurasian Russian East European Studies here at Georgetown School of Foreign Service. And I'm very pleased to welcome you to Russia and its neighbors with Jill Dougherty. My role here is to introduce Jill and to occasionally take part in the discussion. And Jill will introduce our guest, but I'll just say I'm very happy to have Professor Sadurski here with us. Um, Jill Dougherty is adjunct professor at Series at Georgetown. She is a journalist who has worked extensively with CNN, most prominently as the Moscow bureau chief, but also as the White House correspondent, and she continues to work with CNN. Uh, and she has just written her memoirs entitled My Russia, about which we will be speaking separately here at Series. But Jill, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Michael. Really appreciate that. Okay, so welcome to everybody, and very glad you're here. I think this is going to be kind of a different, maybe more philosophical conversation, which has to do with society and what makes societies tick. And today we're focusing on Poland. And, backing up, if you look at the world right now, Poland really is a powerhouse of Europe, militarily, diplomatically, geopolitically. Warsaw is one of the strongest supporters of Ukraine, as we all know, spending billions of dollars on new and very sophisticated weapons. And Prime Minister Donald Tusk says he's planning to expand Poland's army from 200,000 soldiers to 500,000. And he says he's going to be training, or they will be training, every able-bodied man in the country. It's quite astounding. But politically, domestically, Poland might be even more interesting because in 2015, as everyone remembers, the Polish people elected a populist government. It turned out to be a populist authoritarian government. The PIS, the Law and Justice Party, it was founded in 2001 by twin brothers Lech and Yaroslav Kaczynski. And then 10 years later, 2010, Lech Kaczynski was killed in a suspicious plane crash that was blamed on Russia. Then the PIS, when the election took place, seized control of Poland's judiciary, the media, cultural institutions, even companies, and restricted the rights of minorities. But then, in December of 2023, the PIS lost power, basically kicked out of office. So why that happened and what has been happening afterwards is what we are going to be discussing today. And our guest is Dr. Wojciech Sadurski. He is the Challis Professor of Jurisprudence at the University of Sydney in Australia and professor at the University of Warsaw's Center for Europe. Currently, he is at Princeton as a Rockefeller visiting professor for distinguished teaching. I actually had the privilege of hearing Dr. Sadurski just last week at the University of Michigan. And his Copernicus lecture, which I really found very deep and interesting, focused on precisely this question, that change. So welcome, Dr. Sadurski, and please forgive this long introduction.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jill. Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you for having me here. It is a very great privilege and a great pleasure too. Indeed, just as you have just said, in 2023, the authoritarian populist government of peace lost elections, and with some hesitation, it took about 2 months for the transition to actually occur. It surrendered its power in mid-December 2023. Now we are in the nearly the end of, well, we are at the end of March 2025, so it's a year and 4 months after, and it has been a very strange and in many ways disturbing period, the period which still is going on, namely that we have a democratically elected government in Poland, with the coalition presided over by Donald Tusk, undoubtedly the most talented and gifted Polish politician after the fall of communism. The government has a quite well-designed program of reform, of at least going back to 2015 to the pre-Law and Justice Party government, but it cannot do it. I compare it sometimes to landmines. That is that the government is operating in the situation of a minefield, where most of its energy is devoted to avoiding those various ambushes. Another good metaphor is that of Sisyphus, this unfortunate mythological figure who was condemned by angry gods to pull up the hill, this huge, huge boulder, only to see it fall down as he was reaching the summit. And we may have many other metaphors to describe the government which has a strong electoral legitimacy. Let me just say that the coalition parties, democratic coalition parties, won 53% of votes, while Law and Justice 35%. So it's a huge, huge electoral legitimacy, but which is restrained by various institutional devices. Now, I am a lawyer myself. I don't want to go too deep into the technicalities because probably they would be very boring. But we have the institutional setup whereby a great number of persons, offices, procedures, and institutions are entrenched in a way which it is almost impossible to change through normal legislative democratic process. They are entrenched either because of presidential powers. We still have, and will have until late May, President Andrzej Duda, who is a Law and Justice nominee, and who is completely disloyal to the current government, who is, one may say, a remnant of the ancien regime. But more importantly, even after Duda goes, we have a number of positions which are entrenched in a way that they have set terms of office, for example, for 7 years or 5 years. So it will be very, very difficult, in accordance with a strict principle of legality, to remove those people. And we saw this situation mainly in the top judicial bodies. One is Constitutional Tribunal, which became a farce, which is purely a facade institution, performing two functions. First, to invalidate any important laws brought about by the current government. B, to protect people of the former government from any prosecution, etc. Second, we have the so-called National Council of Judiciary, an institution unknown to the United States legal system, but very popular in various continental European systems, which is the body to some extent representative of the judiciary, but not only, which has absolutely crucial role in appointing, promoting, and demoting judges. So it's at the very heart, at the very center of the court system. We have the Supreme Court, which is quite different from the US model of Supreme Court, which is a huge, huge court, counting about 100 judges, operating in various chambers. And now, to a large degree, those judges, over 50% of them, were appointed with the recommendation of this unconstitutional, illegal Council of Judiciary. And we have the Office of Public Prosecution, which, at least at the top, is largely dominated by people of the law and justice. So this is, in a sense, a situation. And in addition, we have the supranational European bodies, very often very well-intentioned and well-meaning, such as the famous Venice Commission. The full name is the European Commission for Democracy through the Rule of Law. So, all the nice things are there, which keeps reminding Polish government that that restoration of the rule of law has to be always done in accordance with the strict principles of legalism, which to my mind and to the mind of many of my colleagues and friends in Poland is a recipe for paralysis. The government basically can do nothing. So, Jill, to put it very briefly, the situation today is that although formally speaking we have a democratic government, this democratic government is in many ways restrained by non-democratic institutional devices.
Yeah, that is really, I think, almost hard to get your head around, although I think you make a very good point that the government that is in power, actually there is a continuation of the previous government. So, controlling things. I'm interested in maybe a little bit of backstory here. Could you take us before that election when the Law and Justice Party was brought into power? And I'm interested particularly what the Polish people were thinking at that point. Why did they go for that government, conservative, populist, which turns out to be quite autocratic?
Well, I would say that the Polish case of the election of populist authoritarian governments is part of the worldwide phenomenon of populists who turn out to be authoritarian, something which is not very clear before the election, who managed to get either majority support or at least a significant plurality. When you look around the world and look at the figures such as Erdogan in Turkey, or Modi in India, or President Duterte earlier in the Philippines, or most relevantly to Poland, Orban in Hungary. I mean, unfortunately for us Democrats, a very upsetting truth is these people have real, genuine support of a large section of their communities. Why? It's a long, of course, story, and in my view, the different configuration of different factors affect the emergence in power of such figures. Sometimes it is mainly related to ideology, to certain traditionalism, anti-secularism, anti-liberalism. Sometimes it's the fear of the aliens or the other, either external other, such as immigrants, or internal others, quote unquote, say sexual minorities. Sometimes the reasons are purely economic, and sometimes the reasons have to do with the certain fatigue with the older, more liberal governments. And in Poland, this last point probably is one of the most important, because before 2015, before Law and Justice came to power, the ruling coalition, the one with Tusk, ruled for 2 consecutive terms for 8 years, something that after the fall of communism was a total aberration. Normally, the usual term of office of a party or government or president is just 1 term, and then there was a general disenchantment. Now they ruled for 2 terms for 8 years. There was certain fatigue. There was no doubt there were aspects of corruption, not as big as we saw under the Law and Justice. Nevertheless, something that greatly deteriorated the image and popularity. And we had in 2015 a real migration crisis in Europe, and the leader of those of populists, Jarosław Kaczyński, one of the 2 twin brothers you had mentioned at the beginning, managed to capitalize on the general fear of migrants and refugees somehow, coming to Poland and replacing the good old white Catholic traditional Polish community with something alien to Poles. So that was, I mean, there were a number of different factors, and these factors triggered not only the election of Law and Justice in 2015, but also their re-election, and also re-election of their president, Andrzej Duda. One should remember that in Poland we have a different system than in the United States. We have a basically parliamentary system with the president having a secondary role. Nevertheless, important. It's not a purely honorific function, say, as in Germany or in Italy, for example. The most important weapon that the president has is that of vetoing the laws. And his, or her, in case of Poland, so far always his, veto can be overridden only by extraordinary supermajority of the parliament, which de facto never any party managed to have. So the president has a fundamentally negative role, but this negative role may be quite crucial, as you have seen over the last year and a half.
Mm-hmm. So I want to include Michael in the questions, but I just have one other kind of logical question. So then you have a shift backwards, away from that, which to me is quite surprising, that the Law and Justice Party is defeated. And then you go back, you have a process of re-democratization. So why did the people decide at that point that they were ready for re-democratization?
Okay, that's probably the key to understanding today's situation. So in some ways, the result of the elections in October 2023 was a quote-unquote miracle. But when I say it was a miracle, it's not that I have in mind some superhuman transcendental forces. It is rather that it's so unusual around the world to see the populists lose powers, even though they had very deeply dismantled the institutions, and in particular the electoral field, so that the field has been very, very fundamentally tilted against the democratic opposition. There are several reasons. I'll mention only 2 or 3 for this immense election, because I must emphasize the election. I mean, the only comparable situation I can think of around the world is that of the victory of President Lula in Brazil over Bolsonaro. The difference being that Bolsonaro didn't manage to dismantle the institutional and judicial system to such extent as Kaczynski in Poland. So first of all, the victory in Poland of the democratic opposition, and a huge victory, is due to a truly charismatic figure of Donald Tusk, who is an extremely smart politician, but who also manages to approach people's emotions, not only their minds and their reasons. He knows when to elevate his discourse and his argument to something very openly emotional, talking, for example, about love in public relations, something that is not very typical for liberal politicians who normally avoid this sort of warm types of feelings. Secondly, there was a huge mobilization. The turnout in Polish elections of 2023 was nearly 75%, 74.6%, which is unusual in the countries where the election, in the democracies at least, where the elections are where the voting is non-compulsory. So it was about 12% more than the usual turnout in the elections in Poland before. And much of this additional 12%, so much of this extra, were young and women. So women and especially young women, voted predominantly against Law and Justice, largely on a single issue, I would say, and that is the draconian regime of anti-abortion law that Polish Constitutional Tribunal, but de facto Law and Justice, because Constitutional Tribunal has no independent existence now, brought about in order to placate or to please Polish Roman Catholic Church. So I think the word church needs to be mentioned in this discussion because Poland is a very, very highly religious society, much less secular than most European societies. And in contrast to the United States, there is no religious diversity. It is like 90% of religious people, if not more, are Roman Catholic, and Polish Roman Catholic Church is extremely traditionalist and I would say reactionary. So there was this immense backlash against the power of law and justice and the church over women, over the reproductive rights. I would say that that was probably one of the main factors which was decisive for victory of Tusk.
A quick note, I want to invite people to ask questions, which you can begin to put into the Q&A function, and we will be turning to that in a few minutes, about 10 minutes or so. But Michael, do you have a question? I mean, this is something that I think is just a fascinating,
Yes.
fascinating, disturbing.
I have two questions. I always have questions, but this has been extremely interesting and also, of course, relevant as the United States experiences its own populist authoritarian turn that is proceeding very rapidly and more rapidly than Orban's and more rapidly even than Putin's, right? They did it over many, many years. And in this country, there's a looming conflict with the judiciary, which is your area of expertise. And I know you've written about the judiciary in Poland as a kind of weak link in and I think that the one question for you is, do you see any parallels and what is your observations on the looming conflict with the judiciary and the executive in the US? But related to this is, another US related question, which is the turn against Donald Trump's popularity among law and justice, and the fact that it does not seem to have been complicated by the clear tilt against Ukraine that was manifested itself in the White House when Zelensky was criticized and berated in public with the president and vice president. But they seem to, and there's the related to this, of course, is the anti-Ukrainian sentiment that seems to be brewing in Poland, and your assessment of this situation would be extremely welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Michael. So let me start with the first question. And let me bring into the picture again, just for a moment, and maybe unexpected instance, that is that of Brazil. So what was decisive in the fall of Bolsonaro, was that the top apex courts in Brazil, namely the Federal Supreme Court and the Federal Electoral Court, maintain absolute independence. And in fact, their attitude became more and more defiant against Bolsonaro as the term of office of Bolsonaro developed. So, and for some reasons, Bolsonaro either didn't want to, or probably didn't know how to do it. He was very incompetent as president to capture any of these courts. So these courts, in the end, and I am now writing about it, so I would be happy to talk more about it, were decisive in containing any Bolsonaro's attempts to change the institutional structure of Brazil. And the second element in Brazil is that it is a federal state with a large competencies of provinces, or the states actually, which are impossible for the president to contain. And I would say that there is an analogy with the United States, and there is a strong, I think, source of hope. So I have a great hope in the judiciary of the United States, both at a lower level, but also at the level of the Supreme Court. We know that despite the fact that now the Supreme Court largely consists of so-called conservative judges. We know from the history of the Supreme Court that judges often, quote unquote, liberate themselves from the ideology and politics of the president who appointed them. And there's nothing to suggest that this cannot be the case. So I think that when push comes to shove, the Supreme Court, but also other appellate courts in the United States, may constitute very effective check on the presidential powers. Something that hasn't happened in Poland, because in Poland, Kaczynski managed in a very smart way to begin from capturing the top courts, the apex courts, including Constitutional Tribunal and Supreme Court. And the other aspect of the institutional framework in the United States, which is in that way similar to that of Brazil, that is of federalism. I believe that the power of states is such that there are all sorts of things which the president will be unable to do. So combination of the judicial power and US federalism is at least something which marks a very, very important difference from Poland, because in Poland, apex courts have been very quickly captured by peace, and Poland is a very unitary, actually extremely unitary, centralized state where the F word, that is federalism, is like a really very, very ugly word. I once mentioned in one of my op-eds that maybe we can consider some federal solutions for Poland, and I was immediately depicted as some sort of traitor who would like to promote separationism within Poland and probably sell Poland to Germany and things like that. So that's about the first question. The second question, and that is the issue of peace being pro-Donald Trump, is very interesting. Because you see, Poland is the only Central European state in which populists are at the same time very anti-Russian. It's an unusual animal. Whenever you look at the rest of the populist governments or populist leaders in Central Europe, whether it's Orban in Hungary or Janša in Slovenia before, or the current leaders in Slovakia, etc., they all nicely, in a sense, in a coherent way, combine their populism with being pro-Russian, which is sort of logical, because for them, Putin, with his illiberalism, with his extremely draconian approach to minority rights, etc., is some sort of model. In Poland, it's different. Why? Because in Poland, due to its historical tradition, having been between Germany and Russia geographically, and therefore with the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact being a constant memento that the greatest tragedy, existential threat to Poland may come from any rapprochement between two main Poland's neighbors, Germany and Russia. In Poland, Polish society, regardless of whether we are talking about the left wing or right wing or the center, is very deeply anti-Russian. I would say anti-Russian emotion is part of Polish DNA. And therefore you cannot win votes by being even mildly pro-Russian. You have to be anti-Russian if you want to have any reasonable electoral result. And now we have a situation in which reduces to a question. Can you be at the same time anti-Russian and pro-Donald Trump? This is the predicament that Law and Justice has. They want to be at the same time strongly pro-Donald Trump, and they are. I mean, their representatives came to president's inauguration. They stood up in the parliament, in the lower chamber of parliament, and shouted, Donald Trump, after the election results were announced. They are deeply and sincerely pro-Donald Trump. But at the same time, they are deeply and sincerely anti-Russian. So with the rapprochement between Donald Trump and Putin, their situation, they are in a sense, they have this cognitive dissonance. That's their problem. And this problem there's no good solution for it. I suppose this is one of the problems which will kill any chances of their candidate in the forthcoming presidential elections this May.
That was, again, great question, Michael. I have a question which you've mentioned several personalities, especially Donald Tusk. And then we have the Kaczynski twins. And I'm interested in the role of personalities. Specifically, Donald Trump is a personality. And so in that time, let's say that Law and Justice gets into power, was there a, or even when the party was founded, maybe, was it a product of personalities or ideas or a combination of both? Did they have a team behind them? Donald Trump has quite a team that was working for 4 years before he was reelected to, as we've talked about, the Project 2025, et cetera, who were very specifically working out plans for what they would do when they got in office. So what about the PIS in the beginning? Was there a team of thinkers, or were the twins actually, deep thinkers who had the idea of what they were going to do? I'm very interested in that personality question.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because the answers to both your last questions are no and no. There wasn't any team behind Kaczynski brothers for a simple reason, because the brothers, and in particular, I talk about Jarosław Kaczynski, the surviving twin brother, who was always much more active and dynamic in this engine of twin brothers. Lech was very much in the shadow, overshadowed by Jarosław. And I must make a personal disclosure. I know both of them. I knew both of them personally. So, they were always distrustful of any of the advisors and supporters who came too close to their position, because it's a typical syndrome of any, if you like, despot or dictator. I don't want to use, maybe these are too strong words, but at least any leader who may be afraid that that someone outgrows them and rule, and then they will produce someone who will replace them. So now, when we are talking only about Jarosław Kaczynski, he has skillfully, basically, eliminated any of the possible rivals. Jill, you will recognize very well it from Soviet history of Stalin. I don't want to compare Kaczynski to Stalin, but from this point of view of being distrustful of your deputies and of your closest collaborators, there is a similarity there. And for Kaczynski himself, under any standard criteria of, say, charisma, he's a completely non-charismatic person. He's shrewd, he is smart, he is good in this sort of lower case P politics, that is politicking behind the stage. He's not a good speaker. He's not good looking. He's not particularly interesting and brilliant in what he says. There was a saying once about cult of personality without personality. So we may have in Poland cult of personality without personality, because Kaczynski is not such. But he said he has been very, very smart, and he identified a certain coalition of resentments. So there were a number of different resentments building up and brewing in Polish society in mid-20s and even earlier. And, when you even think about the name of the party, Law and Justice, it built upon a fear related to law and order situations, to criminality, to corruption, etc. And they promised we would eliminate this type of disorder or threats to safety of people. And I think that they managed, and then Jarosław Kaczynski managed to continue it, to somehow put together a certain coalition of different resentments, mainly against possibility of migrants, because statistically there were no migrants in Poland before the Ukrainian influx of Ukrainians, of course, only of Ukrainian women and children, in 2023. So that's I think the formula for Kaczynski. Compared to Orban, there is absolutely no comparison between this sort of charisma, quasi-religious admiration that he manages to elicit in a large part of Hungarian society, and Kaczynski, who is sometimes admired for his skills, but never loved in any way in which we think about charismatic leaders.
Fascinating. We do have a question in Q&A. It is from Catherine Pliwachewski. And there are two questions, actually. The first one is, as a student who is currently based in Poland, I see a lot of news regarding Poland's hard power, for example, military, but less so regarding soft power methods. Are there any soft power tactics that Poland has been successfully employing outside of Pan Sadurski's anti-Russianness solidarity as a cultural identity, which is very apparent and powerful, especially in Polish youth? That's question number one, and then we'll go to question number two.
Yeah, so of course, Tusk managed to use quite a lot of soft power, and not just Tusk, also, for example, his probably the most important two most important ministers in his cabinet, that is Minister of Foreign Affairs Radosław Sikorski and Minister of Justice Adam Bodnar. They both, in a very smart way, managed to appeal to certain symbols which are dear to Poles, and did it in a way which did not engage any of the hard power, but was exactly within the field of soft power. So Sikorski managed to appeal to certain tradition of bravery, of honor, of independence, of sovereignty, but without pushing it to the nationalist extremes. And he has credibility in it because as a young man, he was fighting against Soviet Union in Afghanistan, etc. So he has certain charm, which I think somehow connect with the traditional Polish image of bravery. And Adam Bodnar has a different, the Minister of Justice, has a different type of approach to soft power, which is basically about insisting on the rule of law, on the accountability for for corruption and past crimes and misdemeanors, etc. He manages, even though I maintain everything that I said, that he and the whole government is deeply constrained by the entrenchment of the former regime, he manages somehow to convince a large number of people that he's serious about the rule of law and about the values of legality, something that Poles have been starving for, something that Poland have been dreaming about during the years of peace. So yes, I think there is a certain important spectrum of different symbols and symbolisms that Tusk employs, and which he employed in an extraordinary way. And you living in Poland, you would know it better than I do, because I was away at this time in these two immense demonstrations in Poland in the lead up to the elections of 2023, where he basically spoke to the heart rather than to the brains or minds of his supporters and also of people undecided. That's I think is about the soft power of the government.
All right. And the second question from Catherine Pliwachewski is, what is the relationship between Poland and the Baltics at this time? Do we see Poland coming to the aid of the Baltics to potentially fill gaps in foreign aid intervention that has been threatened to be pulled by the United States?
That I don't really know, and I don't think that Poland has sufficient capacities to, and even political will, which I'm sorry to say, to defend militarily Estonia, Lithuania, or Latvia in case they are being assaulted by Russia, and in case other powers, including the United States, decide not to comply with Article 5 of NATO. I just hope it will never come to it. When we look at the map, and if we have this idea that Russia's imperialism will not stop, will not end at Ukraine, but will somehow spread beyond it, something about which I'm not actually certain, then probably one thinks, first of all, about countries such as Moldova, which are also very close to Russia, and which have this Transnistria region, which is basically Russian occupied or dominated, and which is not in NATO. So that wouldn't trigger Article 5. That wouldn't trigger any particular dilemma for the American administration, whoever will be in charge of that administration at that time. But yes, your question is significant, because many people in Poland say, look, we are big, we are a 40 million population, but what about these tiny Baltic states, those 3 states? Will NATO come to aid if they are being attacked? Probably the attack will be more of the hybrid attack. Probably it won't be an occupation of territory. But let's hope it will not happen. My imagination cannot stretch as far as to imagine such a horrific scenario.
Do I see Michael wanting a question there? Yes, please.
Yeah, so I wanted to follow up on one aspect. So I asked 2 very big questions earlier, and you weren't able to get to the question about Ukrainians in Poland.
Sorry, yes.
But I want to just put this in a slightly broader framework, because, of course, Polish-Ukrainian relations have been very fraught for well over a century, and we go back to the Ukrainian minority in interwar Poland. You go to the ethnic cleansings of the OUN against Poles at the end of World War II. There are border changes and various revanchist agendas connected to Galicia. And then all this seemed to have been settled, and there was such an outpouring of support for Ukraine, and the huge influx of Ukrainian refugees after 2022. And now there, in the past couple, year and a half, there seemed to be a kind of a turn against some of the significant problem of, refugees, and how this is playing out politically in connection with, the pro-Trump sentiment you mentioned. So I think it's a really important issue.
Yes, absolutely. Sorry, I forgot about this aspect. So 2 points I would like to make. First of all is that this outpouring of support for Ukraine after the launch of the full-scale war by Putin was genuine and incredibly deep. I was several times in Poland at the time. I was involved in the actions of one of the NGOs. I could see how huge, and largely because it was under Law and Justice government, largely without much support from the government. And my NGO friend said, well, the best we can say about the government is that it doesn't produce any obstacles to us. So largely it was bottom up. It was spontaneous, it was societal, and it was just wonderful. So the support was genuine. And as usual in such circumstances, 2 years after, there has been a certain fatigue, and which probably is inevitable. But this fatigue has been exploited by fringe movements. So there's one fringe movement which does not belong to any party, which openly says, this is not our war, we are not going to fight against Russia. And by the way, Ukrainians committed those horrible crimes in Volyn at the end of the Second World War. Why would we come to their aid? How much? What do we get for our aid, etc.? But this is a fringe. However, within the mainstream right-wing parties, and I have in mind two of them, Law and Justice, with the candidate Karol Nawrocki, and the so-called Confederation, which one may think as some sort of Polish Jobbik, the much more to the right and much more nationalist than the Law and Justice, which presents itself more as a mainstream center-right party. These two parties have been making some gestures towards anti-Ukrainian sentiments because they have detected that they can earn some nationalist votes on it. It never was going as to openly challenge and question the main military and political support of Poland for Ukraine, but it went like, well, why would they be paid welfare if they don't work? And of course, almost all Ukrainians in Poland work, but very often they work in a way which is not visible to the taxation office because they just are paid in cash for being cleaners, etc., or carers of old people and so on. We are talking mainly about women and women with children. So why would we give them welfare? Or why do they have priority, which is an urban myth, priority in access to public health care? All children in schools, why would they have some priority? So these are all examples of big bias and animus against Ukraine, but they are not absolutely central. I mean, there is no serious political force, and I believe that you cannot really win net votes, that is, get more votes in favor than against you, by being openly Ukrainian, even on the right wing.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Sadurski, you said, or you indicated that you're not convinced that Russia actually would invade. And, I want to take it from the Baltics to Poland and look at what the Prime Minister is doing. I mean, he is basically dragooning the entire male population to get trained for a war that could take place. And if you look at the billions of dollars on weapons that we've been talking about at the top, the Prime Minister, at least, is convinced that this is a serious threat. So how do you see it? Could you explain a little bit more, not the Baltics, but actually Poland itself?
Yes, so I think that the government's position and Tusk's position is well encapsulated in this old Latin phrase, si vis pacem para bellum. If you want to have peace, prepare for the war. And that is now almost the official policy of the government. Also, so it is more like a deterrence. And for sure, some aspects of rapprochement between US administration and Putin give good reasons for the build-up of military capacity of Poland. The second aspect is that only militarily strong Poland may be a credible part of the European defense capacities. And I think that, and that was actually clear in an op-ed by Radek Sikorski, Minister of Foreign Affairs, in the Times, in New York Times a few days ago, where he said, look, there is no contradiction between relying on transatlantic solidarity and also building up a European defense force. Of course, Sikorski is the minister, is a diplomat, and he has to put it in this way. But to every reasonable person, there is a clear need to enhance strong military capacity in Europe if the United States makes United States administration makes conditions upon its military help in the face of Russian threat. So I think that much of this policy of Tusk to which you referred to, and which is a very fair, very accurate description of what is going on now, is related to the European audience, to the EU, rather than vis-a-vis President of the United States. But you know, I don't think that if I understand well what Tusk was saying, it will be there won't be a compulsory military draft. I think that at least at that stage, the government is planning to build upon voluntary training of all, and not just men and women. I think that he presented it in a non-gender specific way. So I think that it will make to everyone willing a capacity of going through military training with special privileges related to your education or work or whatever, so that the employers will be obliged to give you leave for military training, etc. But that won't be a compulsory. I think that he builds upon this sense that now there is such a widespread conviction that something has importantly changed in the world regarding the security of individual European states such as Poland, and it's not necessarily the change to the better.
You know, there's another question from Catherine Plivachevsky, and it's an interesting one, and she thanks you for the previous answers. She said that in case anyone was not aware, Poland's position on Transparency International's 2024 Corruption Perceptions Index is at the lowest that it's been. And then she says, to put it into context, Poland scored a 53, whereas neighboring Germany scored 75. Why do you think this is? Do you think Poland is able to begin a new upward direction under Tusk and potentially with a newly elected president? Although a score is just a number, she says. So is corruption actually diminishing?
I have two answers to your question. So the first answer is, as we all know, Transparency International measures the perceptions of corruption, not corruption itself. And this is not exactly the same. Perceptions persist. The corruption under peace was huge, was immense. And it wasn't like a little guy's corruption, you know, giving, you know, in cash under the table, etc. It was a huge systemic corruption, mainly related to the state-owned enterprises, which were the source of incredible riches for the loyalists of law and justice. So this policy of graft and of the official systematic corruption has been so strong that it would be really strange if the perceptions of corruption disappeared with the victory of Tusk's government. But my second answer is, I don't want to be, I'm not, and I don't want to be certainly a propagandist for Tusk's government. And there have been many very upsetting signs that some very bad practices, especially when it comes to access to positions in state-owned enterprises, which were practiced by peace, are really not abandoned by Tusk. So that certain promises which Tusk gave, that some institutions will be dismantled after he comes to power, for example, the National Media Council, when they manage to put their own people there, they are relatively happy about them and they stop mentioning it. When the prosecutor's office has been taken over by an admirable and impressive Adam Bodnar, they no longer openly say about the separation of the prosecutor's office from the Minister of Justice office. And we could see, yes, in state-owned enterprises, in their boards, which are source of huge remuneration, now people close to Tusk government and law firms close, sort of supportive of Tusk government, get preferences. So I wouldn't say that the current government is absolutely immaculate about it, that it's absolutely clean. This is one of my major criticisms of this government.
You know, we only have 5 more minutes left, and I just wanted to ask you a personal question, if I could. You actually, as I remember from our conversation in Ann Arbor, you had, was it 3 cases brought against you by the previous government?
Four,
4.
but one was discontinued right at the beginning, so we may settle for 3.
All right. Well, congratulations, I guess, in order. But I think it's a serious question. If you are living in a country which at that point is controlled by a government, you know, which is, let's say, populist, authoritarian, and you are presented with 4 different court cases against you, what do you do? How do you keep your bearings? How do you, you know, keep your focus on the future, you know, personally for you? And what happens to you affects the country, because there are others like you. So, you know, if you could kind of give us a personal, inspirational message at the end, it would be excellent.
I wish I could, but my personal experience is non-typical. So I'll say something about me, and then I'll say something about more typical cases. My case was non-typical because I had a job overseas outside Poland. So the only thing that I could be worried about, that they wouldn't allow me to leave after I come to Poland, but they didn't go as far as that. Because I have double nationality. I have also Australian nationality, having lived there for several decades, and the representative of Australian embassy came to one of my trials in Warsaw. So, you know, and I have a reasonably good source of income outside Poland. So my, if you like, existential aspects of my material aspects of my livelihood were never affected. Yes, I had to spend a reasonable amount of money on my defense and on various expenses related to it, but in the end, it didn't affect me too badly. But there were many people in Poland against whom similar cases were made, several similar accusations of defamation, either criminal defamation under Polish Criminal Code, Article 212, or civil law defamation. I don't think that anyone had as many as I had, you know, but many journalists, NGO people, some scholars had these cases thrown against them, and they didn't have this type of backup or securities that I had. And they are much more admirable or impressive than I could dream of being. So what I would say is that what was in Poland the main source of their strength was a very, very deep solidarity, professional solidarity, whether we are talking about judges or journalists or NGOs. The solidarity was huge, and the solidarity was transnational. That is, it was largely also backed by European Union and by supranational organizations such as Article 19 defending freedom of press or Human Rights Watch and things like that. And there was never, I think, a sense in Poland during this bad 8 years between 2015 and 23 that an individual who faces the vindictive, angry government is alone. There was always a sense of support, and support which transcends the borders. And that's why I think these people managed not just to survive, but also to become some sort of heroes of public imagination, of public culture. Some of these judges really have reached, fairly so and justifiably so, a level of certain, you know, celebrities in a positive sense of the word.
Wow. Well, thank you very much, Professor Dr. Wojciech Sadurski. It was a pleasure and an honor to talk with you, and really educational, I guess.
Thank you. Thank you so
very
much.
much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Jill, and thank you, the audience, for being here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And thank you to the audience too for being there. I think this was a fascinating discussion. You know, we put it on social media, so I hope that the people who are here will not only keep a recording, listen to it maybe again, but also share it widely. I think this is an important conversation.
Yes, absolutely. And we should also thank the Carnegie Corporation of New York for supporting this program. And we look forward to its dissemination online. So thank you so much.
Okay.